Hey Kevin, how's it going?
Hey, doing great. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. So we're
Yeah,
doing this at a little bit different time, but we still are on the same topic for now, which is
I
eternal conscious
know.
torment and figuring out where in the world this came from. Because so
Yeah,
far we've checked a couple different places. We've checked the OT or the Hebrew Bible, and there doesn't seem to be a real defined eternal conscious torment there. We checked through. The New Testament, especially the Gospels and the letters of Paul. We saw some things that people have taken to mean eternal conscious torment or some version of hell at any rate. And then we are now moving on from the Gospels and Paul to Revelation, which is a place that a lot of people think about when they think about hell for
yeah,
some reason or
yeah,
another. So,
yeah. And,
anyway.
and and not to mention like the philosophers of like, Plato and Aristotle and early
Oh
early
yeah, we checked
writings.
checked there as well. Yes.
Definitely. So it's obvious that the afterlife is of interest of our human race
For sure.
and a mystery. And I sent you I think a podcast of a
Yeah.
podcast I listened to called the New Evangelicals, and it kind of one of the hosts mentioned this book by Bart Ehrman and um, and how it helped him with his fear of the afterlife. And I feel like it's done the same for me.
Mm.
Just the idea of just there's a lot of different ideas in not only different cultures but in different throughout the Bible. There's not one voice, one definitive, you know, definition of what hell is and what it's going to be like.
Or
So
heaven for that matter.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I kind of related to him where it really helped him just not to be as worried, although it's still there, it's still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
ingrained. It's such a part of us. Like
yeah.
what if I do mess this up? Do I need to do the safety belt where I mean, that seems like the safety belt wouldn't really work though. The Pascal's wager deal, where you would
Oh,
have to, you know, profess belief, even if you weren't sure, just because. Well, Pascal's idea was more that you have to kind of like believe before or you have to like act before you believe, so that you
mm,
become a believer even before you believe. And then you kind of get
right.
the belief afterwards. If
Yeah,
because belief is a kind of act. When I'm sitting here thinking like what I believe or whatever, like all those beliefs, at least in my personal experience, they come and they go. I think
yeah,
about them, I hold them in abeyance. I look at them, and I doubt them. I'm always like looking to refine them and think about them. And then we're taught that that's bad
yeah,
to like to like do that. Like, the funny thing that I always think of, because like we used to always think of like possible exceptions. So some of them were like, well, what if you're like walking along, you're thinking about, the doctrine of eternal conscious torment. You're kind of like doubting it, but you're, been a believer for all this time. And all of a sudden, like some great disaster happens, like a window falls on you and you die. It's in a city or something like that, or a piano. I don't know what, like they're moving a piano and it falls down on your head and you die. In that instance, when you're in the midst of questioning your faith, do you go to straight to hell for all of eternity at that point?
yeah. It's
Or
almost like that was communicated to me, maybe not directly, but maybe indirectly. Like if you have doubt, if you have, like
it's Satan
if you
talking to you, man.
question, and it's like maybe you're not really, maybe you really didn't,
Yeah, right.
confess. Maybe your faith isn't genuine. If somehow
Nice.
if you have
Yeah.
these doubts and things like that, and that's frightening because we're thinking beings,
That's right.
especially.
Right.
I think you and I we live a long time. We live inside our head a lot. I think we just think about things, and and consider, other people's viewpoints, or
Yeah.
when we read books and things like that. Um, and I just shared with you, like, just the more I expose myself to just reading the Bible and looking through different interpretations, it's like the more unclear
Right.
the Bible is to me. You figure like I was told it would be the opposite,
Yeah.
you know.
Seems like the
But
more seriously you take your faith, the more questions you wind up
yeah,
with. It's just like, yeah. And so, like, what does that mean? Like, oh, like, your faith, is, a bunch of BS because you are
yeah,
actually reading the Bible, exploring what biblical
right,
scholars and theologians have to say over the years and all the rest of this kind of stuff, and seeing that there isn't a consistent message and that kind of a thing.
um,
And that things have changed according to historical time frames, and even the Bible was
right,
responding to historical
right,
situations and all that kind of stuff, and like learning to understand those things. And like it becomes, it was originally in some ways an expression of piety, but it comes to undermine, at least that, if that's what piety is, then it undermines it pretty good too. I
right,
often think too about, in our situation we have immigrants, and there's all kinds of different conversions going on in front of our face half the time. Like, so there are, the one I think about too is like there was a big church that took in a lot of the Nepali who had been Hindu, and converted them to Christianity. It was, a lot of them had been from the untouchable castes and stuff like that. So it was a kind of a simple move, or like it kind of like
hmm
not hard to renounce that. So you can certainly see like the goodness in that or whatever, but you wonder like what exactly they understand about the four laws.
oh yeah,
Like if
yeah,
that's what it comes down to.
yeah,
um
yeah. And I think I've found a lot of people that are kind of have deconstructed or reconstructed their faith. A lot of them, most of them, probably take the Bible very seriously,
yeah.
and they read it, and they actually read it, and they, you know, yeah. I mean, that's just kind of what happens. I think is when you read the Bible consistently and really try to be honest and open about what it's trying to communicate, and just looking at the different valid interpretations. It makes you question, from Genesis and creation, the whole idea of creationism. God made the universe in 6 days, and and
Hmm.
you just read through it. Well, there's two creation stories, so what does that mean? You know, and,
And it strikes a
so yeah,
modern reader, like if they weren't coached otherwise, it strikes a modern reader, I think, as like mythology. So it's just
yeah,
like
oh
it's,
yeah,
it's you need somebody to stand there and tell you like, no, that's literally the truth or whatever. Like
right. And why
like
does it matter? Why does it really even matter either way?
yeah.
So
Right, right. So, and then the other thing is like, with the whole deconstruction bit is like, I think both of us did find a lot of good in our faith as well. Even though there's this there's this really bad thing at the center, this eternal conscious torment threat.
yeah,
But like the love part that didn't seem to have anything to do with that was what at least I wanted to rescue somehow. Like I
mhm,
continue to believe in that, God is love whole thing that I sometimes go off on. And so that's what I wanted to find a way where you didn't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And
yeah.
so reading the Bible, seriously, but not literally, as they say, it was kind of like
And
my way to
even
do that.
yeah, and even like I'm reading through the 12 prophetic books, minor prophets, if you will. And one of them I'm reading through is Zephaniah, and I just think through like each one of those, maybe not every each one, but there seems to be like, God is displeased with Israel and their idolatry, injustice towards the vulnerable. Um, but yet, towards the end, there was like a sense of hope, of restoration. And
Mm,
I think that
yeah.
just can carry on, like just about our afterlife, whatever it may be. God is in the business of restoring his creation. and whatever that looks like, I just don't think you'll just get rid of it. You know what I mean?
Agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. I actually even have taken the sort of Pete Enns tact. I don't know if you read his book on the afterlife or whatever. All right, now I can't remember what it's called, but he even credits like all these afterlife experience things that people have
Oh
had as
yeah.
like valid testimony and stuff like that. It doesn't like convince me, one way or the other. It's just something that, it's like, wow, thousands and thousands of people all over the world. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this
Throughout
is kind
history.
of, yeah, throughout history, this
Yeah.
is kind of like, I don't know, or just, I've never had a mystical experience, but like, a lot of people have. And talking to them, I mean, I've never had a certain type of mystical experience. My mysticism is love, and I've experienced that. So that's what makes
Yeah.
me think God is real, is that actual experience of like,
Yeah.
of people, caring for, being kind to, and loving each other.
Yeah.
That's how I know God, and that's biblical. Like, how do we know Christ? Through His hands and feet, which is us,
Yeah.
and the actual touch of another human being, actual care of another human being. And that's how we know God.
Yeah.
And so, that's, to me, comes from a deeper reading of the Bible than simply, however, people try to think of a deep reading, especially of the book we're talking about today, Revelation. Like, they think deep reading means like numerology and a bunch of like, prognosticating, like, like, oh, I just realized that this thing means this, and that kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Famously the six-headed Hydra and the Whore of Babylon and all this symbolism that's used there, for John of Patmos, referred to specific instances, events, people, places, things of his time. But it's not to say that we can't take that and metaphorize it and make it relevant for our present day or whatever. But it's not a guidebook like that. It's not there to like, tell you like what's going to happen, in the future, except in the most general sense. And what's the most general sense of what happens in the book of Revelation is that, yeah, God's love wins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so like, that's what, hey, that's what we're here. That's what that's worth the price of admission to me. Like, you know what I mean? So like, as long as like you read it deep enough to get to that part, that's the real deep message. It's that like,
Yeah.
you won't know how this is going to go down. You won't know how this will turn out all the time. But, very simply put, in the end, love wins.
Yeah.
Without, you having to carry on about too much of anything, because,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
in
And
God.
God will restore His creation, um, and how God does talk about the book of Revelation, like, um, I was in my, I guess, faith tradition. They taught this was a future. These are future events that were
Yeah,
going to
yeah, yeah,
occur.
yeah.
But I learned kind of fairly early that it was written for that time period and for the recipients of this letter, um, and they were suffering under the empire of Rome
Hmm.
and Caesar and even 666. However, they do
Nero.
their, yeah, it's Nero. It literally spells out Nero, Caesar Nero. Um, so yeah, and it's funny. When I was questioning even just the existence of hell, I looked at my church's statement of faith and said, so where do they, like, I'm reading through the Gospels and uh, the epistles, uh, Peter and Paul, and and I gotta quite see eternal conscious torment, you know, and and then they did, but then there are some passages in Revelation that they did reference, and
Yeah.
even in those passages, Satan was not like head of this this place called hell and torturing people. He was actually
Right.
suffering himself.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that idea of like Jesus is, or that Satan was going to torture you. Well, no, if anything, he will be tortured along with him. But but it just seemed like the only ones there was Satan and the beast, and
And he and his
uh,
minions are thrown into the lake of fire, not
right.
people.
And obviously, it's a very symbolic book,
Yeah.
and so and we're dealing with people of power, oppressing a marginalized group. And so we've talked about this before, like, if you're being, oppressed by a person or a group, you kind of hope that they'll suffer a little bit and they'll get what they deserve. You
Yeah.
know, it's the
I think John
natural.
of Patmos did for sure want that. So that's a part of the book you got to be careful of when you read it. He clearly wanted, revenge. So like,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that's a part of when you as a if you are using a method of interpretation that I do, you're allowed to acknowledge that. And you can say, because it's not inerrant, you can say that like what we're supposed to take here and look at is like how, a human imagines their revenge, on
Yeah.
their enemies. And that, what we can learn, and what we have learned, is that even though human beings carry God's message, sometimes they carry his message incorrectly. And sometimes they want to take, what they call God's words and use them in, somewhat vindictive ways. And so that, it can even become a lesson for us about how not to do that.
Mm,
But whereas at the same time, there's still something in it, worth saving, worth talking about, and you can still get stuff out of it if you just read it as a piece of literature. So
yeah.
rather than, I mean, but you have to start with that historical base that you're talking about, where you start off like understanding what his situation was as a persecuted Christian and under kind of like the first Christian persecution. And then you find out, you understand that Christian persecution wasn't as widespread as persecuted Christians like to claim that it was. Like it
Yeah.
was a lot more limited, and there were Christian martyrs. It's not taking anything away, but
Right.
it was not what it was portrayed to be, and was definitely not what modern day Christians who want to act like they're persecuted pretend like they're, how they're being persecuted. It's so again, so you see, like it's much more complicated, because like that lesson is something that you have to get by actually really taking the text seriously and studying the history of it, and then you can start to relate it to modern times, the way we can get some message from it today. And then the other thing that's been a big part of and it's in Book of Revelations has not been very important except in America, actually. And in the Catholic Church, it was virtually never considered. It kind of got in to the canon on a on a wing and a prayer, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Right.
It was not a book that was liked by a lot of Christians, by a lot of the church fathers, for a lot of different reasons. One of them was just felt too bodily, too fleshly. Like just the descriptions of heaven seemed, very yeah, like a big party, whatever, and it just seemed like, oh, that's just too much in accordance with our will. What about, what Paul says, through a glass darkly or whatever. So like, it just seems like, oh, this is just some sort of wish fulfillment fantasy. So a lot of people didn't really
Mm,
want it in there. But yeah, it got in, and then it was kind of ignored for the
yeah.
most part. Until I mean, but there were, there were things in the Middle Ages where Handel's Messiah, for example, a lot of lines of it were taken um, from uh, from the Book of Revelations. I mean, Luther obviously called the Pope the whore of Babylon and that kind of stuff, and then that sort of began a mapping of the Catholic Church, like as like, the beast and the six-headed hydra and all. Started this whole thing of like
Yeah.
figuring out like it as like some predictive manual or whatever. But like when you understand those things, you can still, I mean, it's understandable if you say like, no, this is just toxic. And there are a lot of people who do the deconstruction thing and never do any kind of reconstruction, or what I would call secondary naivete, because like it just was too painful. I mean, it was just, they just saw it used to such bad ends. And I have too, but I have to remind myself that the Book of Revelations was also used in liberation theology in South America during a lot of the struggle, and as Gutierrez put it together. So like it was put to good use. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so it's not, it's like it's it's mostly been put to horrible uses, but not always to good ones. But
Yeah. I think maybe if you look at it like, I mean, this is how I kind of look at it. You have, you know, a marginalized people, the Jewish nation for most of their existence. Um, and then you have these empires. Yeah, maybe Egypt is not an empire, but you have Egypt, and then you have um, Assyria, and then Babylon, and Persia, and then you have like Alexander the Great and the Greeks, and then you have Rome. And it's like, and I think it's a question that we all have. It's like, why do the evil seems to, why does evil seem to prosper, and why do people suffer, and why are people oppressed? Why are we oppressed? And where is God in this? And Bart Ehrman said that this book is basically about that God is sovereign over the world.
yeah.
And and I also believe there, like I mentioned about the prophets, there was always like a hope of a restored creation, and
Mhm.
particularly as a nation, that they
Yeah.
will be restored, uh, that God had promised long ago. And so I think, but that's what we all. I mean, even Bart Ehrman he mentioned that he's a agnostic atheist, because he can't he can't he struggles with the idea of suffering in the world. Why is there childhood cancer, or why is there why do good people suffer? And that's something that we all grapple with, and I think the ancients are grappling with the same thing as they're living underneath an oppressive empire. And
Right.
that's kind of how I look at it.
And there was
And
a
of
sort of a
course,
predomination of like you're suffering in the Old Testament because you did something bad. And so, like,
yeah,
you were still always kind of wrestling with that, or you didn't
yeah,
follow God's letter to the law, or whatever. Even the prophets, are basically saying, all these people come in and beat you up, and you don't have your own kingdom because you don't treat the poor right. So there's always
yeah,
this kind of like um, explanation that's trying to be that's be on offer, basically. But yeah,
right. Mentions the lake of fire as the second death. We kind of talked about that. That's kind of how he viewed it. Um, and just God is sovereign over the
so
world, even
annihilation
if
is
it
in
doesn't
there.
seem like it. Yeah, a little annihilation is in there. It's interesting. I know we're going back to Paul, but I'm part of a Bible study um, via Zoom. There's a professor from Marquette. He goes to Mennonite Church in Milwaukee, and he opened up um, his Bible study for the summer to people in Columbus. So I'm doing a Bible study through Zoom, and we're reading like a gospel a week. And but we did talk about heaven and hell, of course, like in Luke, and we just finished Luke when we were talking about Luke, and then he mentioned Paul, and he thinks, well, he's a universalist. This particular teacher, um, but he suggested, like I said, do you think Paul is a more believes in annihilationism, and he thinks that Paul is a universalist, which I thought was interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't heard
So
that one.
yeah,
But
maybe as I reread it, maybe I'll just, I don't know.
well, there's plenty of passages in Paul that you could use to say one way or the other. So the
Right.
one that everybody does for universalism is that, yeah, I mean, well, is that whole, neither slave nor free, neither Jew nor Gentile, neither male nor female passage. Seems like,
Yeah.
okay, like all these, there's just going to be this big oneness or something like that, or that's what the
Right.
kingdom of God is.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, really, you could do anything, but I mean, and it's clear too, and this is just the thing that this is what we're talking about, biblical interpretation, is that Paul is Paul. And so we can take Paul as having a perspective. We try to understand it as best we can, but we don't let that decide our theology completely. Because
Yeah.
there are principles in Paul, like this, absolute like value of love that, has to underlay everything. Otherwise, you have nothing, which
Mm.
makes it seem like love is the ultimate thing. And so it's you know what I mean? It's like I can then take that and then interpret whatever else comes along according to that principle, which I do. So like,
Yeah.
but a lot of times people articulate something like maybe Paul did in that, Corinthians passage, that they don't even understand the full ramifications of, so that the reader of it later has to take that and apply it in a way that maybe they didn't even fully, get at themselves at the time. Paul is not God or whatever. And so like he's somebody who had this experience that and I believe he had some like really significant experience. I'm not in the position to falsify it. I've seen plenty of people do it, but like I'm not so interested in that. So I've seen evidence both ways or whatever. But like when it comes to analyzing somebody's claims about having had a spiritual experience, like seems like he passes everything, and just in terms of like empirical, like yeah, something happened, you can
Yeah.
chalk it down to hallucination or whatever. But like for me, whatever he makes of whatever happened to him, uh, because I've kind of through my reading of the Bible and other traditions and philosophy, and come to the conclusion that like love has to underlie it all. When Paul says that in Corinthians, I say, "Yep, okay, we're on the right track, and this is how we're gonna like you
Mm.
you did see something, you did get a glimpse. Like I've never had a white light experience, but that's been that much has been revealed to me, like just through life, like knowing when you're in the presence of caring and kindness and consideration and stuff like that, that it's hard, and that it's the only thing that's worth it. And so that's my spiritual experience, and that's how I wind up reading everything.
Yeah.
And you used to call this principle Christ the key, so that like Christ reveals, and it used to be more like Christ in the Old Testament is like presaged by these certain passages. Once Christ has been revealed, you can see they were talking about Jesus or whatever back then. But that's not how I take the Christ the key principle. I take it
Mhm.
as this presaging, not of like himself, the Messiah necessarily, but as like as love or whatever. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, when the prophets are talking about taking care of the poor or whatever, that's there it is. That's when that if Christ the key were anything, that's Christ right there. Like in this cosmic Christ sort of a way. Um, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
not in a specific like the Jesus of Nazareth kind of a way or whatever.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
which I happen to believe, the two
Hmm.
coincided at one point in history somehow. But that's a whole nother deal. And so yeah, I'm no longer going to, I never really was, I wasn't raised this way, but I'm not going to get lost in revelations in that way. I'm not going to think that that's how God reveals himself. I don't think that's how apocalypse happens. Apocalypse must have something to do, mostly to do, entirely to do with love. Like
Mm.
it's
Mm.
not, it's not going to be like handing out punishments and torture. Um,
Yeah.
and again, it's hard to hold on to that, and I want to hold on to that, but that is my faith, at any
Hmm.
rate. Um, and then, so that's Revelations, and then,
Yeah. Now we're getting to post-canonical stuff, I suppose. Um,
yeah,
in his book, which kind of like it seems like it got to the point where uh, there was going to be some sort of reward and punishment in
Yeah.
the afterlife before the resurrection,
Yeah.
and and then it got to the point where not all churchgoers are going to go straight to heaven, so to speak, and they're going to suffer um, somehow to purge their sins. Um, kind of, and that kind of, I guess, uh, was a precursor to the doctrine of purgatory. I thought that was interesting. Just the idea of, like, I think it was actually, we mentioned that yesterday in my Bible study, where there was a parable or a passage that talks about some will be beaten with many blows, others will be beaten with few blows. And I think that's maybe where they get that. The idea of purgatory, in that
Oh,
all of us are going to suffer
yeah.
to some
I just think it's a
extent.
very human thing. So,
Yeah,
it's sort of like the story of, the parable of the rich landowner who hires some laborers in the morning, hires them at midday, and hires them like, a couple hours
yeah,
before quitting, and he pays them all the same. It's
yeah.
just the people can't deal with that. So there can't be like some sort of like, I don't know, instantaneous, like you obtain, God. You have to be, and also people would imagine like, well, when you die, like, I mean, this is the problem with the baptism thing too. So it's like, okay, so like it gets rid of your sin. Now you're clean. So you technically should be able to go straight to heaven. But like people were always noticing like, well, they continued to sin after their
Yeah.
after their baptism, and but we're only talking, but John preached one baptism. So
Mm,
when you go to you're good, you're baptized, so you're bound for heaven, but you got to go to purgatory to like work off your karma, basically, although obviously that's
yeah.
mixing.
Right.
But I mean, karma is just this very simple idea that it's a way of, even if you can't see it, like being rewarded or punished for the things you do.
But with
And
that, yeah. I'm sorry.
Good. No, please.
But with that came the idea of universalism. Like everyone can, I guess, quote unquote, work off their wickedness
Right.
in
Yeah.
purgatory and prepare for heaven. So
Yeah.
in that way, it's a little more hopeful, I guess,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
humanity. It's some way that,
Oh,
okay, your
yeah.
sins
No,
need
for
to be
sure
punished.
is.
Yeah,
Except that, that got, squelched right away, so that it was, back to like, no, really are people that just go straight to hell,
right.
and can't get out, and abandon hope, all ye who enter here, sort of stuff. So it's always kind of
Didn't
existed simultaneously.
didn't David Bentley Hart believe that or considered that? Just the idea
He
of some
said,
sort of purgatory.
yeah, yeah, I mean, he's fine with it as long as it's considered a sort of like progression, so that you can continue
Yeah.
basically to grow and progress, after, I mean, because there's a certain, even joy in working for something and
Yeah.
striving, so that, striving, for, and again, and according to my very simplistic theology, striving to increase your capacity for loving. A lot of people who do have these afterlife experiences, talk about like the unconditionality of the, super saturated love of God is too much. And so you actually
Yeah.
have to like, build capacities to
Mm.
imbibe it more deeply or whatever. And, we do this through, works of mercy and stuff like that. So, yeah, so there's this idea that that's kind of, maybe not even call it purgatory, just call it heaven, like, because the version of heaven that, again, that you kind of get in Revelations and some other places, where are just like the really stupid versions, where it's just like streets of gold and all this other kind of crap, or
Hmm.
people take mansions literally, so they're gonna be out there with their McMansions in the suburbs or whatever. It's funny that C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce took that, as his version of hell, so that he actually said like,
The
yeah, everybody
suburbs.
living in everybody living in like their isolated madness of their
Yeah.
of their penury in like in a big mansion. That's hell, actually. So whatever is meant by mansions is supposed to not be taken quite so literally, basically. But again, you get this, so that it's C.S. Lewis actually even said, kind of perhaps heretically, that maybe in heaven there's actually is some kind of suffering, because it's a joy to suffer for another, and that kind of a thing. So yeah, so it's I mean, or it would be a joy, I guess, maybe, but
Huh.
and so there's all kinds of different ideas about this, and how purgatory could fit. I'm not against the doctrine. I just think it's, if it's considered as just like a purgation, and it becomes like this very sort of like, I don't know, scientific kind of way of thinking about burning out the sin, or as if it were like this,
Yeah.
I don't know, material
Yeah.
thing that you need to like, it's, then you get back to like this almost like ritual purity version of what it means to
Yeah.
be clean or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in a lot of the books after the Bible, so like in the Gnostic, well, again, there's lots of different types of Gnosticism. Most of them don't even really talk about that. So except of kind of like a freedom from the flesh, and a very metaphorical, like a sort of divine spark within that like is your divinity that like can't be put out, that kind of stuff. Okay, but then you also get like actual like, mostly by the second and the third century, not in the first century at all. You start to get, stuff about like tours of hell and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then, because there
Yeah.
was a lot, even in this early church fathers, Tertullian being a great example, like he would write about what was going to happen, and he would say, yeah, you get to watch the people who hurt you, suffering for all eternity. It's part of the joy of heaven or whatever. So there was this vindictive version of it out there. Like i
Yeah.
get i get i
Yeah.
get vindication. That was very much a part of it. Thankfully, none of that that I can think of made it into the New Testament at all, um,
Yeah.
or the Hebrew Bible for that matter. So yeah, there's extra canonical stuff that actually wound up being very influential. Like for example, on Dante and stuff like that. There where there was, yeah, literal tours of hell and stuff like that, which is something that Dante was thinking about, and Dante was thinking about in heaven. I mean, sorry, in hell, Inferno, that there was this sort of like punishment that fit your crime, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. So like trying to imagine God's justice as being expressed in hell. So for a lot of people, like, as we already said, God's justice, that's what hell is. It's God's justice. And I prefer God's love to his justice. But there's a need for both. So you can understand again the desire that there be some kind of, um, yeah, recompense. It
Yeah.
seems to be a part of putting things right, at least according to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
At least the
Mm-hmm.
way we think about, what it would mean to put things right. So,
Right.
uh,
Because we definitely want those that cause harm to others to suffer
yeah, for sure.
to
And I would
get
say
theirs.
too that part of the flesh issue was never really resolved too. So the
Mm.
resurrection of the flesh thing that you see throughout the New Testament, including in Paul, it seems to be something that Jesus preached as well. There is this question of like, and this is where you get this bodily torment sense. Like, since you're going to be in your body, you're gonna feel it bodily, and it's kind of against a certain annihilationism. But as you already mentioned, the doctrine of like instant, like you die and then you wake up with God in heaven or whatever, or you have to wait for a resurrection. Most people don't realize that, if there were a Christian like approved doctrine, it's bodily resurrection. it's but
Yeah.
most Christians don't preach that when somebody dies. So
Yeah.
they preach, grandpa's with you know his heavenly
Yeah.
father now or whatever, which is fine, because like
And
who
more of a
knows,
and that was more of a Greek influence of the spirit leaving the body and
right?
and
for
the
sure.
spirit living on, which is not found in the Old Testament
Yeah, I
or
mean,
the
and
New Testament
Gnosticism in many
for the
ways
most
is
part.
a Greek influence. Yeah, I
Yeah,
would say. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I would say. So like, yeah, so that your soul is like somehow a spirit. It's not, and it's
yeah.
separate somehow from the body, or at
Right,
least it's not when
right.
you're alive, but it separates when you die.
Yeah,
Sort of
and
a
it will
thing.
live on. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, this that I mean, so like yeah, eternal life in the flesh is a kind of strange version, but that's a interesting chapter Erwin put in there, just to kind of like show how this doctrine of bodily resurrection. Well, he first showed about how it first came about, and then this kind of like literalism of it, like how it creates this sort of strange afterlife and this
right.
difficult situation where what happens when you die. Well, you like just are obliviated until you
Yeah,
have any till you're called or whatever, till the trumpets of in the book of
right.
Revelations call you forth. And then the last chapter, um, oh well, tactile ecstasy and torment in Christian heaven. So that has to do with being in the flesh. But then, who will inherit the blessing, purgatory, reincarnation, and salvation for all? So those are the different positions. So who gets the blessed? So the baptized believer, I would imagine. But as you mentioned, then there was lots of people who were baptized and in the church, and other people said, well, they don't believe the right thing about Jesus, so they're not in. It just
Yeah,
became this tool. Like, if you're not with us, you're going to burn. This is where purgatory comes from. This is the reincarnation, uh, as it being a fleshly purgation, process of purgation. And then salvation for all was a viable position. And some people got into it and like wound up being condemned for it, Origin famously. But
yeah,
there were a number of people who seemed to think that God's love would, in the end, be overcome
yeah, yeah.
whatever evil there was. So I don't know. Any last thoughts?
No, we got to the end of it, I think, and we still don't know. So
Well, let's keep
what
looking,
the
I'd
afterlife is going
say.
to be. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's because it's one of these things where it's not something that's known by intellection, but something that's known by the experience of love. So,
yeah, yeah,
anyways, all right, Kev, thanks. One down, and how
yeah.
many more to go? Well, we'll see.
We'll
So on
see.
to John Dominic Crossan next.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks for
Okay.
doing this, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you later.